welcome to Topics. My guest today is Bill Cummings, who is the founder of Cummings Properties and the president of the Cummings Foundation. Bill has 60 years of experience, beginning with the Henshaw property in Woburn 60 years ago, roughly, as a real estate developer in this region with over 11 million square feet. He's also 40 years in the philanthropic business with the establishment of his foundation with his wife, I believe in 1986, Bill.
That's correct.
Okay. Welcome.
Thank you.
Okay.
Lovely to be with you today.
Thank you. It's lovely to be anywhere, right? At our age. In any event, today is a two-part program, two-part topics program in terms of first the real estate business and Bill's overview of what's going on post-pandemic. And then secondly, we want to review what's going on with the foundation as they've just completed another $30 million grant cycle this past June. Okay, Bill, please assess for us this impact of COVID on the marketplace and how are we doing coming out of COVID?
Phil, I would say that the impact on COVID is absolutely enormous, as most people are well aware, as it affects the real estate field. Any part of the real estate industry, I believe. The first 2 years, things just ground to a halt. We were able to stay open because so many of our operations are public service and medically related facilities, and places like the courthouse and hospitalization facilities. But everything stopped, really. Even New Horizons that showed our assisted living community in Woburn, they dropped their vacancy factor, went up by 30 people, 30 empty units. And once it stopped, 2.5 years ago, I guess now, is that right? Things have come back. Our occupancy, if one looks just at the parking lots around these buildings here in Cummings Park and West Cummings Park, they're not as full as they were by any means, but they're healthy. The people working from home today is sadly still up there, but it's dropping slowly but steadily, and maybe we've probably got 80% of the people in these buildings that were there before.
Now, would you argue for or against working at home when you consider some people are saying that, particularly in the Boston region, productivity of the employee has improved because they're not spending an hour and a half in traffic every day? They roll out of bed, they get on the computer, they get a full day's work.
Maybe that's true if you're working in Boston, but if you're out here in Burlington or Woburn or Stoneham or towns like that, and you're on the highway, it hasn't been that hour and a half of travel. And I don't think productivity of people working at home, most people, we've talked about this a good bit, and maybe it's 10% or 15 or 20% of different professions and different positions can be handled from home effectively. But the vast majority of them can't. And think about how much young people were being hired, and then immediately told to work from home. Come into the office for orientation, and then go home. We don't want to see you anymore. Just work from home and talk to us when we call you.
Didn't necessarily improve their work ethic.
I guess it didn't. And how the hell do they ever get to know the company or the organization, or how do they ever get mentored? I mean, that's such an important thing for new people coming into the business world. Somebody to help them and guide them and teach them. And how many people who are your age and my age want to do that? That's the biggest reason I work every day.
Right.
And at least, when I'm not on vacation, I take a lot of vacation time.
Well, at 87, I can hardly blame you, Bill.
Yeah, I do average 40 hours a week still.
Well, the interesting thing is, I've always said, whenever I call you, you answer your own phone. I always thought that was interesting.
That's a corporate must. Nobody will ever answer that we'll check and see if he's here and let you know. It just does not happen here.
Well,
It works so well.
lease roll-ups leases are long-term items, and we still haven't seen the full effect of roll-offs coming off. Are these people picking up those? Are they releasing? Are they adding new space? Or is this going to be a longer-term problem, like long COVID?
You saw some of the actual leasing figures of what our actual numbers are, which aren't material, except that the total volume of sales that we're doing today is almost identical to what it was a year ago today.
Right.
It maybe we're up $100,000 per month, or maybe it's 50,000. I don't know what it is any given month, but it's just so flat. We'd like it to be going up, but it's not even going up the cost of living.
But you would acknowledge you have a unique advantage in the marketplace since you have eschewed leverage your entire career. None of these properties are under obligation to the bank.
There are no mortgages on any of the 120 or so buildings of any sort. Our advantage, though, is location. It's so often that's such an important phrase in business, in real estate business. What's the location?
Location.
There you go, yeah. And it's just as true as it ever was.
Now let's talk about, you were an advocate of mixed-use development way back, and we see that at Cummings Properties, a number of them, the Shoe, 128 here at Cummings Park. Is that still a viable business model with things like Amazon? Are they affecting your retail properties?
Well, we don't really have retail properties. If you look out the window to my left here now, you see retail properties. And well, Bill, what do you mean you don't have them? I see them, but that's, with 11 million feet plus a little bit, I guess, maybe we don't have, if we've got more than a couple 100,000 feet of retail, I don't think it's that much.
Really?
Throughout the whole area.
Including the Shoe, which seems to have added quite a bit of retail.
Well, do you see the retail because that's what's advertised outside,
Sure.
And it's extremely important that we have retail to support the needs of the community that's right there.
On site, sure.
The on-site community, exactly.
Well, that was always the argument, that you want to concentrate people in the location that they're in.
Right, and if we didn't have restaurants, as we didn't here for the longest time, we put them in the buildings. Now we've got across the street, we've got 3 or 4. We've got 3 or 4 still in our own buildings, but the restaurants in the Woburn area or in Burlington alike are just abundant. When my Joyce and I were married, the only place you went out to dinner, if you didn't go to Cafe Escadrille in Burlington, there was no other restaurant of that type in the area, or on Route 1.
That's where you could go, either Burlington or Route 1.
That seemed to be it.
Or Boston, of course.
Or to Boston. And the number of times we go to Boston now, I feel like I'm coming in from the country to go in. It's just so uncomfortable with the traffic.
Well, that begs the question, since you bring up the restaurant idea. In a ever continuing pursuit of tax revenue, all the communities have enormous increases in the number of liquor licenses and restaurants. And as you know, restaurants are the most volatile space that you can find. I think 40% of them go out of business in the first 5 years.
I think it's at least that many in 5 years.
Yeah, sure. Is this a fool's errand for the communities?
Doesn't seem to be.
At the moment, but what about the next downturn?
There's no more restaurants around now than they're better restaurants, but there aren't any more, I don't think. The smaller ones, so many of them have fallen off.
All right, let's go on to one more taxation question, and that's abatements. Have you seen a drop in values and an increase in abatement requests as it relates to you and in the region?
We don't pay much attention to what happens with other people. It's taken a long time, but we really feel that we've reached a pretty good accord with the 11 communities we work with today, and there's a pretty good understanding that where things are going to be, and they're pretty decent.
Are all those 11 communities operating under classification?
No.
No,
No.
not.
No.
Okay. Now, Mayor Wu has suggested that the further reaches of classification should be approved into law. Is this, again, a fool's errand? Is this chasing after diminishing assets?
I don't want to be critical of Mayor Wu on much of anything, but because I think she's a terrific mayor, even though we don't have anything to do with it in Boston. Mm-hmm. But it's something that the situation in Boston, with the amount of commercial real estate that the city has, be very difficult to start converting 20-story buildings into apartments. And they may probably have to do something. So I don't see it happening elsewhere.
Let's go back to conversion and talk about the chote, the shoe. Place Lane was not one, but 128 was, the 128 Center. In converting these to condos, you've done it in the past. How difficult a process is it, and how can it be set up so that the taxation differential between capital gains and ordinary income is avoided?
I don't want to begin to sound in any way like a fully informed person on taxation issues, since at this point everything that we do, 100% of all the buildings in all the towns are not for profit. And if they're not actually owned by the foundation, and Cummings Center today, Cummings Foundation owns about 61% of our real estate. But all of the income from all the buildings is still applied eventually to the foundations. Right. So I think as far as conversion is concerned, we've done a number of things, most notably the Choate Hospital, former Choate Hospital here in Woburn. And from the time that we purchased that property at a bankruptcy auction with Judge Lavian in the federal court, auction was awarded the title to the property on something like January 3rd. Uncharacteristically at that time, the Woburn City Council approved the conversion in a matter of perhaps as long as 2 weeks.
Well, it was a premier property at the top of the hill in Woburn Center. I mean, something had to be done. Thank God there was a white knight that stepped forward.
For sure. But at that time, the city council tended to be quite divided. Mm-hmm. Now it seems to run along beautifully. Whatever the issues are, people make informed decisions based on what they think. Mm-hmm. But not, it was so much different at that time. But in any case, after getting the approval to do a not-for-profit assisted living community, we had the hospital converted, and we moved the first residents in just before October 1 of the same year.
10 months.
Yeah. Well, 9 months, maybe. 9 months.
That wasn't government work, apparently.
Sure. Okay. But we've got a team of people who are the same, many of them including the same people we had that many 35 years ago. And things can happen so quickly if somebody wants to organize them and get it done. The time we purchased the hospital, we literally had, when they turned it over to us, there was still a body in the morgue. It was there, and then the laboratory had shelves full of body parts, mostly organs, I guess they were, for teaching purposes. It closed, and we were glad there weren't any live patients in there. But seriously, this was it was that sudden that it happened. Wow. And again, 9 months later, we had the first resident move in, and there was one resident who arrived. He was with us. He turned out he was there for 19 years after that, but he arrived at the building on a Saturday morning, and we were expecting him Monday morning. So the director decided she would go. She let him move in, and she slept in the hallway outside his door that night. Mary Ann Outwater from Winchester. Okay, she slept outside the door because she couldn't leave him alone in a big empty building.
Right.
And that's the story we still talk about.
So if push comes to shove in terms of the overall health of the commercial real estate business, conversion is not that difficult a task.
Usually not. Again, some buildings don't convert so easily.
Right.
We looked at a building down in Jamaica Plain area, the old Shattuck Hospital, Lemuel Shattuck Hospital, and that building is one they're talking about knocking it down. I don't know. I think it's a 19, 20, 21-story building.
Yeah, you're
There's
talking
no
about $5 to $8 million to knock it down. Right?
Yeah, sure, but there's absolutely no reason for that.
Mm-hmm.
It would convert beautifully to low-income housing. The neighbors probably wouldn't like it too much, but if it's done well, there aren't any neighbors within shouting distance of the place,
Right.
And it would intrude on a green area, not the building itself, but it would add traffic to a green area.
Well, we're talking intergenerational living is one of the things that have been talked about in the last few years. So the idea of an elderly component, low-income component, a home ownership component doesn't sound so ridiculous.
No, not at all. Look at Winchester. Winchester passed regulations a year ago allowing for accessory apartments. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure that's the name. It was the name when I was chairman of the planning board in Winchester a million years ago. But all of a sudden, no special permit, nothing. If you've got the space for a building and you've got and you're not going to change the character of the neighborhood, it's a matter of right now. Right. And there'll be hundreds of new apartments in Winchester. Right. And that type of thing needs to happen.
That overcomes the McMansion effect too, doesn't it? By adding value, but adding family.
Yes.
So that the property in and of itself is more value because there's another house there.
Yeah, and another thing, Phil, that so often people lose track of, if they see a McMansion conversion, if you will, or a big luxury building going up somewhere, and people want to cast aspersions about it, any new housing units are good for the market. Mm-hmm. If there are more high-income apartments, if you will, or condos, those people lived somewhere before, and their lesser grade homes from which they moved are probably going to be occupied by somebody right after that.
Coming into the marketplace.
Sure, and it makes more movement probably, and everybody doesn't want to invest in and build low-income housing. But any housing at all that's built, I would argue strongly that it's for the good.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's jump into the foundation now. You just finished 2024's grant awards, and that was $30 million. So you're up to how much now that has been awarded from the foundation?
Probably about 530 or 40,000.
534 million.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
530. Now, this started in 1986 with you and Joyce as the co-founders. I want to talk about the gift, but did Buffett steal the gift idea from you?
I don't think so.
Well, tell us what the gift is, or the gift pledge.
The giving
pledge.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Giving Pledge was founded now, I guess, 15 years ago by Warren Buffett and by Bill and Melinda, then Bill and Melinda Gates, but Melinda French Gates and Bill Gates, as an organization to promote social change. And I would say their biggest thing they wanted to do was to encourage people of substantial wealth to be more public with what they do, and therefore motivating other people to realize that you don't have to be secret about it. Mm-hmm. When we joined the Giving Pledge, the then general editor of the Boston Globe called and said, well, I have to tell you, we want to do a story on you and your wife joining the Giving Pledge, but I can't find anybody that's ever heard of you. Really? What would your neighbors say?
Yeah,
what would your neighbors say?
That's right. 6 years ago, we did our first interview. Nobody knew you were a billionaire.
Sure. Yeah. And it's That's what's behind it more than anything else. There's nothing. There's no group action. I've never heard of anything by way of an intent to try to convince anybody to do anything. It certainly isn't political. I don't think I've ever heard the word Democratic Party or red or blue at a Giving Pledge meeting. We typically try to get to all of those meetings. They're held annually and then regionally between the annual meetings. And there are no officers in the Giving Pledge that I've ever heard of. There must be a chairman somewhere. I don't know who it is. I assume his name is Gates or Buffett, but I don't know that. There's no dues to belong. Is no expense to going to the meeting. That's picked up by the Gates Foundation. I guess nobody ever told me that. I don't know.
Well, when you flew commercial to your first meeting, did they pick that ticket up?
No, we get there ourselves.
Yeah, you just took a rental to Vegas, a rental car out of the airport.
That's the story, and it was budget rent-a-car or econo car, one of the two.
They could have at least sent a car for you, Bill.
No, that doesn't happen. And we actually arrived at a very out in the middle of nowhere resort ranch that was for well-to-do clients. We'd never heard of it. We arrived at the front desk and in our little thrifty rent-a-car or whatever it was. And okay, well, thank you very much. We're so glad you're here, and it was very nice treatment. And, oh, do you have your plane? What's your tail number, Mr. Cummings? Excuse me? I didn't know what my tail number was. Didn't have a tail number, but they had a private airport, and most of the members who arrived, if they didn't arrive in their own charter plane, there were 65 or so families when we joined, and if they didn't have their own plane, they certainly had a charter plane. So that was our experience there.
That was enlightening for you, huh?
Have
Have you bought a plane since then?
I have yet to ride in a charter plane.
All right, let's go to the foundation itself. It's a rather unique funding mechanism. As you mentioned earlier, most of these foundations that you see are paper assets that are donated, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, etc. How did you come up with the idea that you would send hard assets over there that would continually feed the stream on a regular basis and not be subject to the vagaries of the paper markets?
I guess I'd have to say, Phil, that the whole issue of long-term financing for a foundation has to start off with the understanding that you're not doing it to save money to pay less taxes. You're doing it because you want to do some good with the funds. Our kids had already been well taken care of. Our four kids all four have given money to Cummings Foundation and have no interest whatsoever, have no concern, I should say, whatsoever, that we propose to give everything to the foundation. So that having been said, how do you perpetuate that, or how do we get there even? But by giving the money, which is the Giving Pledge goal, before you die, you have the fun of doing it and seeing what you can do with it.
Some people don't think giving away their money is fun, Bill.
Yeah, but it's enormously satisfying. And one of the things that you perhaps haven't come to know is that there are 175 volunteers who make by most I mean probably close to 60% of all the decisions about new grant recipients.
Well, that's the interesting thing. I mean, how do you feel about, all of these assets have gone and you're not in the decision-making process as to where the money goes?
Well, I couldn't be. I couldn't begin to be. We could hire people to do it, other people, but if by letting these volunteers come in, and you're welcome to be a volunteer, would love to have you. You'd be an ideal volunteer. We've got Oh, we've had a dozen college presidents as volunteers, and several mayors, 4 or 5 anyway, different communities, and lots of retired medical people. We've got postal workers and firefighters retired.
And these are all in the vetting process from application to vetting to conclusion.
They do different things, but from vetting to conclusion, though, a certain percentage of them will read the letters of inquiry that we request. We don't want, we've got 800, 750, 850 typically applications each season. And of them, we know that we've got to reduce that number fairly quickly. So we make the first cut based on a letter of inquiry.
Right. Then you do
And one group of volunteers reads those letters of inquiry, and they decide who will be invited to submit a full application, but not to make everybody go through that and have that much more work to figure them all out. And at least 3 people will read and vote, different people, but and take this big number, but there'll be different committees of broken up, so that different volunteers, 3 people will read and vote on one group of 3 will do this many and this many and this many, and they will, within that group, one group of volunteers will read it and decide who goes to the next level. Then you'll get the full application coming in, and an entirely different group of volunteers will read them at that level. I should say, first of all, the computer reads them. And it sounds unusual for me to be talking about the computer reading something, because that's not my style, but that's how it works. So that's a cursory. It check all the boxes, and if you check them all right, you get through the computer. But so the second group of people come along and read the full applications, and they decide which ones will go to for the final reading, and those are typically groups of 4 people. They're always groups of 4 people, not typically. They're groups of 4, and whoever is the longest serving person on that committee will chair the group. They all have an equal vote, and there are 3 volunteers on each of the committees and 1 employee, 1 company employee. Now, these aren't executives of Cummings Properties. Occasionally they would be, but more because there's so many of them. But they're more likely, they would be a custodian from Beverly and a carpenter from Marlboro and a nurse from Choate, whatever it might be. And they will get together and they will really hash that over and decide who they're going to get there. Each of them will have, typically they get about 14 applications, I think, and they will pick half of them to be winners.
Well, last year, I think in the 2024 round, I think the statistics were 50% of the applicants were awarded grants. Is that correct?
In the final group, yes. Yeah. And then another group of volunteers will come along and decide which ones of those 50% who are there are going to get a 10-year grant. And now it's either 10 years or 3 years. So, but those are grants of $1 million going out and $100,000 a year type of thing.
Not short money, Bill.
It's not at all. Yeah, but the volunteers work extremely well.
Well, let's focus on that just for a moment, because we've seen so many nonprofits over the years with $1 million executive directors, etc. Your foundation runs on no expense for management whatsoever, right? Your executive director isn't paid. None of the employees are paid. They're all employees of Cummings Properties.
I think 1 employee, I think our counsel is employed by the foundation, and always has been. Our initial, Cummings Properties has its legal department, and there's 5 attorneys there, and then we have a general counsel in the foundation, and I believe it's a he now, that he is paid by the foundation.
Yeah, that might be a requirement too.
Not required, but just that we just felt we needed somebody there. But everything else, all the administrative work, is done by effectively by volunteers here who are paid by the company to do it. So we've got to be extraordinarily careful that we're not in any way benefiting
Right.
the company through the work of the foundation or through the money spent by the foundation. The other way we can provide in-kind services. That's the way the regulation reads, in-kind services, and we use that to do it. So the
Now,
expenses are
60%,
almost zero.
60% of the hard assets are in the foundation now.
They're owned by the foundation.
They're owned directly, and you've
Oh,
pledged...
directly by most of the time, they're owned by through a intermediary that the foundation owns for liability purposes of the foundation.
Right.
So if some terrible thing happened, and I'm thinking environmentally, if there was a truckload of oil
on a building, sure, that makes
broke
sense.
down at the chote in the backyard, and it spilled oil down to Horn Pond or something, you'd say, well, my goodness, that's a big thing. So that's a separate foundation that operates New Horizons.
But the rest of your holdings are going to the foundation over the course of years going forward.
Everything except our personal belongings.
Yes, Jim. Okay, well, when you and Joyce go off to your heavenly reward, how is
Hopefully.
Hopefully, well, you're working towards it, Bill. I can guarantee you that. How is this built to be in perpetuity? Does this organization go on forever doing this kind of grant work?
There is no provision for the foundation to cease. There could be a sunset provision, it's typically called, that 100 years after we both died, or 20 years after we both died, that the foundation would cease to exist and would dissolve by making major grants. And we could do that. There's a lot of reasons to do it. I don't know that we have the best reason to continue it, but we're designing it as an evergreen foundation, and there's the people in charge at that time could change it. There's no one.
The organization structure will exist, and the decisions will be made long after.
Yeah, and how many foundations do you know that were set up 100 years ago and that are still going strong? And immediately you think of Ford and Rockefeller
and Ben Franklin, by the way, which you made a grant to Franklin Institute, as I recall, several years ago.
That's a very good one, and another one that Carnegie is almost everything that Carnegie touched. I think they have a Carnegie name on it. Carnegie matched Ben Franklin's donation in current dollars to Benjamin Franklin Institute of Technology, and determined not to name it Carnegie Franklin. We came along another 100 years after that, and we decided that we would match it as well.
Well, matching it with Ben Franklin's not too bad an idea, Bill.
And that was our thought exactly.
Okay, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our guest today, Mr. Bill Cummings. Good health to you, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you.
Thank you, and have a good day.